Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Platform Enterprise podcast, the show that provides a platform for enterprising individuals doing amazing things. I'm your host, Rachel Donald, and this week I spoke with Lisa Luxx. Guys, do I have a treat for you? Lisa is a poet and an activist living in Beirut, Lebanon, and she is just, wow. What an inspiring, articulate, and thoughtful individual. The work that she is doing with women, for women on the ground in Beirut is absolutely incredible. Her poetry is amazing, and I'll put links in the show notes where you can go and see some of her work. She has a book coming out next year with Outspoken Press. And just generally, this was just an amazing conversation about so many fascinating topics of capitalism, of feminism, of creating spaces in today's world to do collective work, of sisterhood as an act of rebellion. That's kind of the philosophy that she lives and breathes. I feel so fortunate that she came on the show and that I had the chance to speak with her and that I have the chance to share this interview with her. I have no doubt that you will be just as inspired as I am. Share it everywhere you can with everyone you can, because this is the kind of conversation that needs to travel. So everybody enjoy. I know you will, but really enjoy. Maybe grab a pen and paper and take some notes. I've been following everything that you've been doing for years, since I met you in London at the launch of Prowl House. Or Prowl, sorry. I've just been watching with great admiration. Being a poet in this day, in fact, this should probably be part of the interview, but yeah, being a poet in this day and age, like that being who you are, what you do, and kind of carving your own path out in this world as that, I just think it's fucking amazing. So I'm so thrilled to be able to speak to you today. Thank you so much for saying yes.
I'm chuffed that you asked me, and it was really nice to receive your message, actually, because it's really nice somehow to connect who I was with who I am. And you kind of did that when you messaged, you know what I mean?
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's been a hell of a journey, and I've only seen, just whatever it is that you've let us see on the outside through, social media. So I'm very excited to find out more about what's been happening over the past, 5 years?
I guess, yeah.
5 years since launch of Pro, yeah.
Actually, it was more like 6 or 7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a while. Fucking hell.
And you're living in Beirut, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'd really love to get into that as well. Because with the media situation, the international news is still just focused on fucking COVID and Christmas adverts and whatever. And there's obviously so much going on in Beirut that is just not being reported on and is not being broadcasted. So it'd be fantastic to have your insight about that as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'd like to talk about that. That'd be great.
Okay, awesome.
Good.
So why don't I'm just going to start you with, basic kind of I'll introduce you obviously beforehand and everything.
Cool.
But how would you introduce yourself to the world, actually?
How would I introduce myself to the world? The difficulty in this is I'm having a moment, or by moment I mean 8 months, where I'm really reassessing the nature of name. So in the very first instance of introducing myself, I find it a challenge because my very name I'm finding challenging, because I don't know, I just feel like it should always be changing, really. But I guess you were actually asking me what sentence I'd use. I guess poet and essayist, activist. feminist, anti-racist activist. And I think that, I think poet, essayist, feminist and anti-racist activist who believes in sisterhood as an act of resistance.
Sisterhood as an act of resistance.
Yeah.
And why? Why is that? That's powerful. Why?
Why? Because I very much believe that the patriarchy, as Bell Hooks says, the interlocking systems of domination. So the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy is built on a foundation that is entirely binary to the qualities of sisterhood. And I think that if we can foster sisterhood economies, sisterhood care systems, sisterhood values, and so on and so forth, then we will be fostering a genuine alternative to the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy.
That is a message that seems should be at the heart of feminism, and yet was something that wasn't during the second wave of feminism. Embracing feminine qualities or empowering women to be women was kind of not what happened, which is maybe why we've ended up here. And we have all the same rights as men, women, but what is it to be a woman, and what is it to have women's rights, and what it is to kind of take up a space as a woman?
This is a really good point, because I think the reason why it wasn't the focus before is because there was very much, and there still is, but a deeply entrenched survival technique, which was survival by proximity. And so to be more like the white male was to thrive and survive in society. And so, it's calling to mind words like girl boss.
Yeah.
And shit like that. And because inherent in that phrase as well is this notion that she is trying to access capitalist patriarchy, but she is also still a child doing it. Because I don't think that there is a place for women in society yet. Hence why when we hit puberty and thereafter, we are sanitized, our forests are cut back, our body hair, and to be woman is to be dirty, is to be filthy, because it doesn't have a place in capitalist patriarchy. So they kind of need to keep us small, need to keep us girl, and then she's allowed to be boss. It's like wearing her dad's clothes or something, And I think that, but I do think that this proximity, like this taking on the role of the patriarch, has been the mode of survival for many. And you can say that in terms of feminism, and you can say that in terms of race as well, and how kind of assimilation into the characteristics of the white male have been the survival technique. So now I guess we're at this point where there is mass mobilization, and there's an opportunity to foster an alternative to that, hopefully.
It's very interesting, and it makes me think of Isabel Laurie's book, The State of Insecurity, whereby she kind of explicates that democracy isn't democratic process as we understand it. It's actually internalizing the state, internalizing the police, so that we self-govern, so that we don't need somebody sitting on our backs doing it for us. And that survival by proximity, internalizing those survival modes and assimilating, as you say, it sounds very, very similar.
And in the same way, is it Angela McRobbie who talks about this in terms of the second wave of feminism, and how mass media, let's call it what it is, propaganda for the capitalist patriarchy, created this rhetoric of irony within feminism. So it was the idea that it was embarrassing to be a feminist, because why would you need to be a feminist anymore? Like we're all free and we have our rights now. And so there came like this very, like, you know, the sex positive, some aspects of the sex positive movement, people argue, are part of this, like how women sexualize themselves because they have come to believe that that is their sign of freedom. But is it their sign of freedom, or have you internalized his sign of freedom for you?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know where I stand on the sexuality thing, like, honestly. Like, so I'm not making a concerted statement against that, but this is the McRobbie argument, and it's very interesting, exactly as you say, how we internalize the mechanisms that oppress us, but in the most insidious ways.
And then how do you go about undoing that? I mean, when it's pushed so far down, like into your DNA, that you start to replicate that which oppresses you, how do you go about undoing that?
Well, I'm at a stage where I don't know at all how, because you start to realize how embedded it is in your language, and once it's embedded in your language, it's very hard to escape it unless you create a new language. You know, for example, when we talk about gender, and there's a lot of languages that have gendered words, you know, so the table is a female word, and the cup is a male word, and so therefore gender is so deeply entrenched in language. It's so hard to break out of it because everything has been set up in a binary. There's no space for neutrality, even in the objects that we touch. So then how is it escapable? And I do believe, as what's the word? I mean, as perhaps ambitious as it sounds, that only a new language can foster a new culture.
Of course.
Because even when you think about time, you know, there's this thing that is called language relativity, and it's the notion of how our concept of time is built into our language. So if a language doesn't have lineality, then those who speak that language won't perceive lineality in time. You know, everything will be happening in the present tense. So, and when you think if it's that deeply entrenched in time, because time is our perception, really, it's one of our baselines of our conception of reality. How deeply entrenched everything else is in language. You know.
Absolutely. Like, I found
sorry, I just correct myself. It's linguistic relativity, not language relativity.
Relativity.
Yeah, in case you wanted to look it up.
I found when I moved to France and learned my second language, my only second language. let's keep it real. And I was amazed actually at how embedded the culture was in the language, and that was sort of the first moment that I was like, oh my god, it is language that makes culture. It's what we speak. It's the baseline for how we understand and perceive the world. And I genuinely believe that gendered language in France, in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, that is why they're so fucking far behind. Sorry, you know, if you're listening and you're French or you're Italian, Portuguese, wherever, but like, I lived with you. You're so far behind in terms of feminism. Like the gender disparity there, I found truly to be shocking in terms of like the roles that women were still taking, in terms of how women met each other, in terms of how men spoke about women or thought about women. And also like the whole idea to them as like non-binary. And I was working with young people, you know, I was working with 18-year-olds at university, like not non-binary, you know, a person who identifies as they and them and doesn't identify as man or woman. I mean, it was very, 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 very difficult for them to comprehend. And the only ones that had any inclination that actually exists out in the world were those that were watching, I mean, Anglo media or Anglo shows or consuming, Anglo material, because that gave them a language.
And ultimately, what language does is it doesn't, and I'm lifting this, and I can't remember from which linguist or philosopher I'm lifting it from, but that language doesn't describe reality. It builds it. Yeah. And hence why we have to consistently check our own language. Language is actually ultimately probably the greatest tool of revolution.
So, and I completely agree with you. Where does the poet sit there then?
It's a good time to be asking me that question, because in the past 3 months, and we're speaking now in November 2020, and 3 months ago was the Beirut blast. And in the past 3 months, I actually really fell out of love with poetry.
Oh, wow.
I found it surplus to requirement. I found poets surplus to requirement. I think that I just saw too much suffering to feel that sitting and writing a poem was anything other than indulgent. Mm-hmm. And I became quite bitter. And it's only in the past 4 days that I've started to reassess that bitterness or reapproach poetry with who I am now, reshaped by what I've seen and who I've met, the pain that I've felt. And I believe in only studying such things as political theory when you're directly putting it into practice. I don't believe in the ivory tower. I don't believe in sitting around and discussing theories and not putting them on the street. Now, there's no point talking about things if you're not going to practice it. So in all this time that I had fallen out of love with poetry, still when I made my coffee in the morning, I recited Mahmoud Darwish to myself as I made my coffee and his lines about coffee. And so I was talking to my editor the other day because she's waiting on a manuscript that I've been resisting because I haven't really understood its point. And I spoke to her and I said, I need to find a poetry that can be put into practice, like a political theory is put into practice. How can we find a poetry that can be applied to life? And so I noticed these moments where I read Mahmoud Darwish while I'm making my coffee, and it affects the way that I make my coffee every morning. When I make that coffee, like I make it like he writes, and I thought I want to write that stuff. I mean, that's a lofty statement. I want to write the Darwish stuff, but like I want to write the poetry that can be applied in the kitchen, the poetry that can be applied in the streets, the poetry that can be applied on the car ride, or the poetry that can be applied to the sisterhood, the poetry that can be applied to the stranger who you meet after midnight who's crying in the cubicle next door, the poetry that can be applied. And how does it relate to what we were saying before about language as a revolution? Poetry has and always will be the rebel's art form, because for many reasons, but let me only speak to the one that's relevant, which is that if language reorganizes reality, poetry is a language reorganized. It doesn't make sense. Its point and its purpose is to break apart the conventions of language in order to let something that wasn't being said slip through the crack once you've snapped sentence structures, once you've snapped grammar, once you've used a word where you shouldn't use it ordinarily or whatever, what happens then is you create these fractures in language, and through that, something that was unable to be said before seeps out. And so I think that the language, the poet is somewhat an abstract architect.
An abstract architect. The poet is an abstract architect of reality. That's a hell of a responsibility.
It's a hell of a responsibility, but I don't think one should take it too seriously.
Okay.
I don't know. No. I only say that because I really feel that there's a lot of ego and there's a lot of loftiness in poetry at the moment, and I don't want to say anything that adds to the coals of the poet's ego. To be honest, right now, because I think that the responsibility isn't in the writing. The responsibility is in the going out into the world. It's in being on the streets. It's in being on the ground. It's in being part of the rearranging of society and taking that to your work and to your page, and then taking that back to the street and ricocheting between the two. So I don't think that the poet alone has an awful lot of responsibility. I think the poet activated, the poet on the street, the activist poet has a responsibility. And I think that those two things shouldn't be always conflated, because not everybody is writing to rearrange.
I think we're in a very interesting moment in society. Well, I suppose every moment in society is an interesting one, where we have this kind of mix of like desire for revolution and for rearrangement and for rescripting, coupled with the very self-centric, self-promotional lifestyle or mode of being that, you know, a decade or so of living on social media has kind of generated. And I mean, we're seeing it in companies on a business level, like greenwashing, you know, making their products look greener in order to take advantage of this kind of bubbling up in social consciousness of, okay, we need to be more environmental, you know, just to make a buck. And I certainly find this, what's the word I'm looking for? That there's a sense of friction often between what people say they're doing and then how it could perhaps be perceived, and to what end, therefore, we are doing what we're doing. Which is a long way of saying I'd like to hear more about what you have to say about ego in art form at the moment.
I just want to speak to one part of what you just said, which is, and I believe that you're talking about the capitalization of our movements, and they are co-opted. Feminism co-opted, environmentalism co-opted. So many of the movements, you know, for racial justice co-opted.
Yeah.
And not to evade your question, and I will come back to it, but I do just want to speak to the one movement that I believe has the opportunity not to be co-opted, that I know of at the moment, and that is bringing it back to linguistics because of its lack of definition, and that's queerness and the queer movement. Why? Because the great mechanisms that be can only co-opt a movement that they understand. So goth was a subculture until it ended up in the mall, until it ended up in the shopping centre, whether you're listening to this in the UK or the US. But you can't put queer in a shopping mall. Why? Because you can't define queer in the first place to co-opt it. Because the very point of queerness, it is not an umbrella term for LGBT. Queerness is the abstraction of gender, the abstraction of sexuality, the abstraction of these things. And by its very nature, it is evasive.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something that you can't quite capture. And as long as people commit to queerness as the evasive, it could avoid being co-opted into the capitalist mechanisms, and therefore the whole movement falling apart, you know?
That's so fascinating, and takes me back to, I can't remember what it was. It was something I read last year that kind of sparked this whole train of thought about women as a kind of embodiment of the void, and yet also of the beginning of life, and therefore the only thing that can break out of any patriarchal binary that says two things coexist but they coexist oppositionally. Like if you think about the womb, the womb is, I mean, the birthplace of life. It is where creation happens, and yet it can only happen because there is space, there is emptiness around it in order to happen. And so that abstraction there, that evasion, exactly as you say, of fitting into, I don't know, any kind of structure or understanding. I mean, it really, really makes me think of that queerness as the evasion. Also, women is the kind of, oh, what was the word that I was using for this when I was writing about it last year? I can't remember. It was just absence. Woman is absence, and yet the power of that absence. Like, I'm not playing by these rules anymore. I'm taking myself out of the game.
Beautiful. I like that very much. And it brings me to a point where I really believe that the revolution will come from the mothers. You know, and I keep saying the revolution, and by that I mean the revolutions, because I'll say it, and we'll need a multiplicity of revolutions. But I don't think that there's anything more revolutionary than the mother, because in the origins of capitalism, the mother was exploited as the land was exploited. The two things came hand in hand. As the indigenous were exploited, as the black folk were exploited. And the mother was one, and she stretched across them all, because she was what we considered the earth. We called her the mother up until this point, and then she became exploited. The mother was present in all the communities, but she was exploited, you know, well and beyond the kind of peasant men. And still, there's a book called History of the World in Seven Cheap Things, and a chapter called cheap care, and in it they say, Patel and Moore say, that we will only surpass capitalism if there becomes, and I'm completely paraphrasing here, but basically a complete upheaval of care work and the care system, you know. And it's something that I'm working on now, which is creating a small feminist economy for unemployed migrant women in Beirut that is based on creating jobs for mothers to fulfill their care work, the work that they have been expected to do for free for all this time, you know.
Absolutely. God, I mean, sometimes when I think about the feminist movement, and I mean, I'm extremely grateful to live in a culture where we had feminist movements, and where I can now benefit from that as I mean, far more than many women in many other places. But I'm like, God, wouldn't it have been amazingly revolutionary to pay mothers, actually? Drop all the other stuff, drop all the aesthetic stuff, and just giving women who raise children a wage for the work that they're doing. Because I mean, you're forming the next generation, you're forming potentially little citizens. How is that not the most celebrated job in the fucking world? How is that not the most important job in the world?
Quite frankly, the most valuable means of production, to use Marxist terminology, the most valuable means of production, because she's creating the laborers.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
She's creating the workers. Give the bitch some cash. Give her some food. What's up with you? Give her rights. What's wrong with you?
Completely. Give her her bloody dues.
Right?
And I mean, for any, for any parent, to try and sort of be gender neutral about it, for any parent that stays at home and looks after their children, I mean, give them a wage. But like everything about motherhood as that has somehow been like sidelined as this kind of like, it's a side hustle of life now, of modern life, motherhood, in terms of somebody dictating the time that you get off if you're lucky enough to live in a country where you get time off work to look after your kids. The fact that mothers are separated from their children so early on, even though neurologists have the data that so like a baby needs to be with its primary caregiver for the first 6 months of life, day in, day out on its skin. Otherwise, there's going to be imbalances and like neurologically. Like we know all this. And yet it's still not being picked up by
because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we're traumatized. It doesn't matter if we're unhappy families. None of that matters. What matters is that we can sit at a desk and we can work from 9 till 6 now. It's no longer 9 till 5. Yes, some songs went out of aged badly. Like it's now definitely 9 till 6, 9 till 7, 9 till 10 if you can,
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how we are. That's why care is absolutely radical.
Yeah. Oh, but it is. I met a woman a couple of weeks ago who is a caregiver to handicapped people, and she's 26. She studied law, and this is what she does, and that blew my fucking mind. If she'd said that she went, she was an engineer on the space station, that would have been less mind-blowing to me, because I was like, wow, you started down that, you went out and you got like, that necessary qualification that was going to give you a certain quality of life or a certain place in society or whatever. And that, like, you look after people and you're young as well. Like, you've clicked so early on how important that is. You've managed to be self-sacrificial in a way so early on in life. Mind-blowing.
But I'd be asking her also like how she can bring these things together, because we need the lawyers as the caregivers, but we need them to be sat in the same room. We need to be able to have somebody to explain to the other mothers, the other single mothers, the other migrant mothers, and so on and so forth, the foster mothers, the mothers who's lost their children. You have to explain to them what their rights are. What are their rights? Who do you know what your rights are?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Of course you don't. No one knows what their fucking rights are. No. Like, we need to be having regular meetings where we understand what our rights are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happens if they're breached, and where we go if they're breached,
Okay, so the podcast guest I had on last time is an asylum lawyer in the United States who switched practice to asylum when Trump was elected, because she was like, right, this is where we're going to need fucking help. And she was saying that with the women that she works with, she has to explain to them, no, people aren't allowed to rape you here. No, your husband isn't allowed to have sex with you just when he wants to have sex with you. That's also called rape. No, people aren't allowed to do this to you. No, you are allowed to call the police. No, you are allowed to report it. She was like, I have to explain them fundamental rights.
But I mean, you're saying that's to women seeking asylum, but sis, that's to everyone. I know natives of England who don't know that it is rape if their partner has sex with them against their will. So it's not a nation-based thing. It's not a nationality-based thing. It's not an upbringing-based thing. It is a global patriarchal learning that you are submissive to him, however that manifests. And you can feel that you're a bad bitch in the street, but you have to catch these moments somehow of submission.
Yeah, absolutely. How would I want to talk more then about this feminist economy that you're creating for care work? Can you explain a little bit more about like how you put ideology into practice Because as you're saying, instead of just reading political theory, being out in the streets and doing something about it, I think that is a bridge that people I really, really struggle to cross, because A, it's fucking hard, and B, I mean, theory often is not written to be put into practice. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
For sure. So I'll loop in poetry as well, because it might call answer to a question that I feel I evaded of yours earlier. But also, you know that I've been writing about not just feminism, but I have a poem called Voice of the Earth, and it's one that I still come back to. A lot of poems I let go, I let them kind of fall away like dead skin cells at some point, but this is one that I continue to carry forward, because it does feel that it continues to have effect and mean something where I take it. It's very much about the mother, and the Mother Earth, but interpret it as you will. Okay, so this is step one, where I feel that poems sometimes, the reason why there should be caution of ego in artistry is because the art didn't necessarily come from you. Sometimes it's something for you to follow. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So following this and following this belief in feminist economies and wanting to see feminist economies, I started a master's program studying anthropology and cultural politics, so that I could understand better financial systems, understand better the cultural systems at play, and therefore have the language and the all of the theory and all of the knowledge that can help me understand how to create an alternative. So if I can understand how all these ones were set up, then I can understand the fundamental basics of economies. So studying capitalism and studying the origins of early capitalism, and understanding that you can't have a thorough practiced resistance without being hyper aware of the wider context of the situation that you're trying to navigate. So what do I mean by that? I could see, for example, I don't want to ramble too much, but I do feel like giving you maybe
please do
the bigger picture. So you can see for example that in your community that there is a need, and you can try and meet that need, but it will be like a bottomless attempt where you'll keep having to retry to fulfill that need, because the system around you is fundamentally broken, and what won't
it's creating that need,
right,
creating the fact that there's that space.
The broken system made the need in the first place. Exactly. So you're going to have to continue to create it, and we're not built as such. So what you have to do instead is understand why and how the system created that need, in order to, from the ground up, make a very, very, very thorough assessment of how that gap can be filled. So what we're doing is I am in Beirut after the blast, and even before the blast, just during the financial crisis, there is and after Corona and everything, there is so much unemployment, and there's the kafala system here, which means there is a lot of migrant workers who didn't particularly choose to be here. It's a modern slave trade, and who find themselves without work, without their papers to get home, without access to rights. And I meet a lot of women who don't have enough to feed their baby. In fact, as soon as we finish this podcast, I've got to drive out and drop off some food and diapers to a woman who's about to get evicted, and go and speak to her landlord and go and sort that situation out. God. But doing this kind of thing isn't sustainable. I can't keep finding each individual woman and supplying her with, using international donations that I kind of like gather in from the feminist community to keep supporting these women, because one, it's getting to winter and donations dry up. as Christmas comes and what have you. 2, it's getting to winter, which means needs are more dire than ever. It's cold and it's raining.
Yeah.
And 3, nobody wants to be stuck in the helper-helpy paradigm. Nobody
Yeah.
wants that. Like, at the forefront of our feminist praxis needs to be autonomy, independence, you know. So how do you recreate this feeling of autonomy and independence for these women, for these single mothers? You create jobs that allow them to work within their community and responding to their own needs. Okay, so I'm meeting women who were like, we were down at the protest at the Kenyan sit-in, and she was like, you know, this protest really is good because I can bring my child down, and it's like daycare because there's so many women here to look after my son.
Okay.
And so it's like, okay, so, you know, daycare is very, very expensive. So why don't we create a daycare initiative where we connect women in their neighborhood? So we're not moving into a neighborhood and opening a center up, because that will have direct economic implications on the community around it then. So actually, this will operate from homes, small networks of women where they will put themselves forward, and some will do the child minding, and that will be paid. And some, you know, there'll be women who come in and clean the house after that's been done, and that will, of course, be paid. There'll be a cook, and we'll connect them with an organic farmer outside of the city, a small organic farmer, so that we don't have that alienation from the means of production to the consumer, and they can go and get to select their vegetables, and all of that is paid. And they're there for creating a small economy with subsistence, sustenance and care at the forefront of it, and autonomy at the forefront of it. And within that, we'll have monthly check-ins and assessing what needs are, bringing in lawyers from some of the activist legal firms here, and getting them to come in and break down like what people's rights are, and what these women's rights are, and all the things I mentioned before, and create Skillshare opportunities, and just internalize. Because I think if we're consistently asking, bringing it back to the common capitalist workplace as we know it in Britain, if you're continue to ask, I want to earn the same amount as him, I want equal pay. Bitch, he ain't gonna give it to you. It's been this long. Like, you have to just create a small economy between yourselves. Like, that's their economy. They built that economy for themselves. I don't want a piece of their economy. I want a piece of our economy. I want to know what it would look like to have a feminist currency.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's one of the sort of fallacies of modern, or of today's feminism, especially when we see, okay, I'm going to use the word empowered loosely here, but like empowered women, i.e. women that we have the right to stand up and to talk, and, you know, we're not going to come under danger for that. We have space to do that, and to still be knocking on doors 60 years later, being like, I want this, like, go get it. Just go make it. Go set up your own business and employ only women, and pay, you know, have like a minimum wage in your company of like 30K or whatever it is. Just go and stop fucking asking. They haven't given it to us. Just go and go and get into parliament. Oh, but it's difficult. Yes, it is, but that's why you have to go and do it, because it's never going to get any easier. Like, it's really, really time to stop. And it's like this kind of culture of sort of self-victimization, in a sense, where it's like, now isn't the time to still, and this is my personal opinion, now isn't the time to still be saying, well, I'm a victim of this and I'm a victim of this and I'm a victim of that. That isn't actually going to change anything. Now is the time, especially in the cultures in which we have the right to, is to stand up and be like, well, I'm not going to be a victim of that anymore, because I'm going to go and do X, or I'm going to go and do Y. I'm going to band together and we are going to create whatever it is that we need.
I agree with you on the we. I think the points before that become difficult because there are many limitations. And I think as long as we always operate, and this is why I said sisterhood is an act of resistance, because I don't think we can do it on our own. I really don't think that we can do it on our own. I can't do it on my own. You know, like this initiative is working within a cooperative of other feminist anti-racism activists, you know, like, and we build a cooperative and we move and we make decisions together. And there again is a dismantling of ego and heroism, because you can't do it on your own. Capitalism taught you to be in competition, and it's difficult. And I don't believe in parliament. I am a political anarchist, and I do believe in small democracies. I do believe in I don't believe in a mass governing body. I don't think it works. I don't think that there is an example that I can call to mind of mass governing working. And if it did, and if it was you know, for the people, and if it was for the benefit of those under that governance, like a lot of the leaders of the non-aligned movement of the mid 20th century, though it ended up being assassinated because the colonial powers that be will not allow that to happen. You know, so I don't think that mass governing works. I think that we have to move small. I think that we have to move in packs, and I don't know. I guess that speaks to things happening in terms of collectivism. And I don't know that I necessarily just believe that all change will happen in collectivism, but I think that enough pockets of it will create a cultural impact. And I haven't yet worked out how I feel about national transformation, to be honest, and where it goes from there. I just know fuck Parliament. I just know that's how I feel about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to, like, I do completely agree that this sort of total farcical pantomime of pretending that millions, a group of people that are millions and millions and millions that come from different cultures and different races and have different needs and desires and wants, and rightly so, can be governed by a small party of people that only reflect their own interests, because that's the culture that's been built around that institution. And when you see communities kind of taking more control of their own situations and of their own circumstances, and empowering themselves and each other to create systems that directly fulfill the needs of their own, I mean, magic things happen when people do that. And it really is amazing to see. I think I've spoken to you in the past about this society in Athens called communitism, which I think says it all in the name. And they are really, really working very hard to provide essentially a roof and four walls for as many different projects and people and democracies as they can. And it's incredibly revolutionary and incredibly hard. I'm sure you find that as well. It's very, very, very hard to do. I mean, nothing in the current world is set up for that.
No, it's not, and nothing in the current world is set up for creating space in your life to be able to carry these initiatives out. So I think that it does become very wearisome as well, which is again why I think it needs to happen in collectives for it to be efficient in any way.
How do you find it on a personal level? Because this is, I mean, I don't know. I mean, were your parents activists, or has this been very much a journey of self-learning for you?
It's been a journey of self-learning for sure, and I'm not quite sure. It's a good question. Not quite sure how I got here, except for being surrounded by really admirable women. And I always think about that question, you know, on Twitter that circulates, that what radicalized you? And this is a very difficult question because I really don't know the answer, and I haven't thought about it much at all, like how exactly I became who I was. But I guess that there's always been that thread, which is something that you illuminated to me when you contacted me, and had been following since Prowl, you know, that it's been present, and we just learn and we grow. And around 4 years ago, I started surrounding myself more and more with women activists, women non-binary queer activists, and just felt the power of that collective. And then moved to Beirut, and you know, we went through the revolution, and I think there's been so many opportunities for awakening in this past year, collectively. Even Corona, an opportunity for awakening in terms of our capitalist sensibilities. Black Lives Matter, an opportunity to awaken in terms of our anti-racism, and multiple revolutions happening around the globe, a chance for us to reassess our political ideology. I think that there has been multiple portals of awakening happening at a pretty accelerated pace. So I feel everybody, I don't know, I like to think that everybody's become activated somewhat, and it probably depends how close to, again, proximity, this word proximity, but how close to the pain and ache you found yourself, you know. I'm not sure that answers your question at all.
Oh, it's a very, very interesting point either way. I mean, I think as well, you know, the question that sometimes comes to my mind is how much more pain and suffering can we endure without, you know, before we let go? Because it seems like in terms of every single movement, the environment is such an easy example. Like the planet is literally warming up. Countries are getting hotter and hotter and are going to be unsustainable. We're going to have climate refugees very soon. We can see the ice caps melting. We can see forest fires every year. And yet we're not stopping. We're not stopping our mode of living. With, oh God, you know, Black Lives Matter, that was such an exciting moment, actually, you know, to see those protests taking place around the world and to see people standing up, and they continue to stand up, because standing up isn't just about that one-time act. It's about staying upright as, you know, the world comes at you. And yet, you know, what kind of what institutional changes have there been since that series of moments that illuminated even further the severe racism still at play almost everywhere around the world? How much more pain and suffering is it going to take before people come to?
Well, I feel that when you speak of the environment and you speak of responsibility, how we continue to allow this to happen, you know, that environmental change isn't going to alter whether you as an individual recycle, though I urge you to, but whether you can lobby, whether we can actually, you know, lobby and what have you. And there's pain and there's anger in the world. And I believe that anger, and I speak of this from a feminist perspective, but I do believe that our anger can be transmuted into a really productive force. Anger maybe is the state of being that creates internal turmoil, but outrage is gold dust. Because outrage is a driving force. You can't vision new possibilities without being outraged first. So I think as long as we all consider ourselves, alchemical and consistently transmuting as often as possible our own pain and suffering and outrage and that of those around us into productive drivers, then actually the more pain and suffering that we gather, like almost we harness it somehow. We can harness it in and use it as our horsepower. I'm not saying I want people to hurt. I'm saying that we already do. And so let us do something with it.
I want to touch briefly on, and I think that this is an important question given the situation of the gender conversation. We have used a lot the word woman in this, I think exclusively. We've talked of women. You talk of sisterhood, you're creating a feminist economy. What would you say to any man listening that might feel alienated from this conversation or cut out from it?
This is a very good question. How do we? Did you say manless?
No, man.
Oh, man.
Yeah. What would you say to any man listening that might feel alienated or isolated from our conversation?
To be honest with you, he's not my concern. He's really not my concern. Like I welcome him in to listen and to take notes. But for him to feel alienated, it's not for you to feel that you have a place, actually, right now, because you've had a place, and you need to understand what your place is, and you need to do your studying, and you need to speak to the men around you, and you need to figure out your role. I can't manage that for you as well. I have to manage what I can focus on, and he is not my responsibility.
That was very succinct and very well put. Absolutely. Like we all, I think, especially God, I mean, the work that you do, having moved to Beirut and gotten involved with the women that you are and creating a new economy, creating jobs for people, getting more and more involved on the streets. I mean, like your story is very much an example that we can all do it. We can all educate ourselves and we can all do what we need to do in our bit of the world. And it's what was the word we used before? Self-learning. And so, yeah, it's not a place to feel included or excluded from people's groups. It's about providing space for what needs to happen in every individual community.
Put it this way, I wouldn't have liked somebody to make a space for me just because I felt alienated. I had to create that own space. You want a seat at the table, go find the wood, go carve your chair, and come back and find a place to put it.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Why the hell not? As you say, outrage. It sparks.
Exactly.
Now, Lisa, you've got a book coming out, right? A collection of poetry coming out. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I certainly can. So I'll first tell you that I had a collection, a chapbook, so a small collection of poems out this year called Trust Your Outrage. And every single person who benefits financially from that thing existing in the world is woman or non-binary. So awesome. I'll say that, and then I'll also say that the next collection that I'm working on for Outspoken Press is called Fetch Your Mother's Heart. And it is an exploration of the symbiotic relationship between tenderness and violence, and how longing leads to grief. Longing is a type of grief. When we talk about it in an intimate way, when we talk about it in a family setting, when we talk about it in the social setting, and when we talk about it in the political. the grief and longing can be one of the same thing, and so it's kind of a exploration of these two states that we see as disparate, but that actually seem to be homed in the same place within our bodies.
Amazing. And why have you chosen to work with Outspoken Press?
Because for 21-22, Outspoken Press will be a women's run press. Joelle Taylor is taking the helm as editor, and everybody published is a woman or non-binary.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks. And when will that be out and available for people?
So due to Corona, it's been pushed back, but I believe now it's going to be April 2020.
Okay. 2021?
2021. Yeah. Time traveling. Yeah, April 2021.
Okay, awesome. And is there any place that people can help, like get involved? Like you said, you collect donations from the international feminist community. Is there a place that people can find you? They can look you up. They can get involved and help in any way?
Yeah, I'll firstly add, I also collect donations from men. So if that's how you want to find your seat at the table, then please do feel free to donate.
I mean, obviously feminist does not just mean women, because men are feminists too, obviously. So yeah, of course.
That's a thesis, but yes. And they can find me on social medias, and I post on there when I'm opening up windows to accept donations. So I'm on Instagram under Luxxy, Luxxy_Luxx, Luxx, and I'm on Twitter, and they're really the main ones that I function on.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I will put links in the show notes as well for people to find you and learn more and get involved. So to finish up, I always ask, is there someone that you would like to platform?
Ooh. Yes. One person.
Mm-hmm.
You want one person?
I mean, not necessarily, but if you feel so inclined, I mean, platform as many as you can, right?
All right. I start with Dana Ash. Dana Ash, a cultural activist, and my sister here in Beirut, and she's really a powerful community tool for all of us. And she runs Haven for Artists. She's also a poet and a writer. She's also Aries like me, so don't expect any other type of rhetoric than than this kind of bad attitude that you've heard from me. Expect the same kind of shit. And I really recommend her. And I'd also like to recommend a poet from the UK who's also getting published by Outspoken Press in the next 2 years. Her name is Safia Kinshasa, and she is a impeccable poet, an impeccable writer, and I'd really like to hear what conversation she'd have with you.
Okay, amazing. Well, Lisa, thank you so fucking much. What a conversation. This has been enlightening, and actually, I hope to have you back on in the future to continue this.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. You can find the link to Lisa's chapbook, Trust Your Outrage, in the show notes, as well as her social media links, website, and the link to Ella Beirut. If you can make a donation to Women on the Ground, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lisa. You can find her contact information on her website. You can also find Platform Enterprise on the socials and sign up to our podcast newsletter at podcast.platformenterprise.com. We would love to know what you think, so please leave us a review and leave 5 stars if you want to support the podcast. It means so much that you're listening. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.